You are listening to the 90 Days Later podcast with Anna Charles, episode 157. Welcome to the 90 Days Later podcast, where I show you how life with less alcohol is more fun than you think. I work with high achievers who struggle to drink a glass of wine without it turning into 2 bottles. I'm the one they call when they want to take it or leave it. So if you want to change your relationship with alcohol that doesn't involve counting days sober, you're in the right place. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I hope my American friends had a lovely Thanksgiving last week. All right, so here we are again on the podcast that helps you take control of your relationship with alcohol and turn it into whatever that is that you want. Now, as a reminder, last week I teed up the 4 craving mindsets that I see. So the mindsets that we have when we're responding to cravings as an intro session. And today we are going to start with the deep dive into the 4 of them. And today we are going to tackle the fighter. All right, this is the fighter mindset. If you have ever felt that cravings are a battle, like you're fighting them off every time they arise, it's kind of like you need your sword and your shield out to protect yourself, then today's episode is for you. We're going to look at what the fighter mindset is, why it might not always be the best approach, and how to shift gears when you feel yourself getting caught up, right, in that what feels like constant battle, in inverted commas, against cravings. So let's get to it. We're going to start by breaking down the fighter mindset. I want you just to first of all picture this. You are faced with a craving, right? It could be at a party, it could be at home, it could be out and about, and all of a sudden you feel a craving. And in your mind, it's a bit like you're stepping into a boxing ring, right? Oh, here we go again. And then you have to get ready to fight. You have to get ready to win this battle and prove to yourself that you can resist. Every time a craving hits, you're going to see it as the enemy when this happens. You're going to see it as something that needs to be defeated. And your go-to strategy when handling it in this way is going to be sheer willpower. And you might tell yourself things like, I've got this, I'm strong enough, or maybe I won't give in, right? Your mind is geared up for a fight. I want you to really put yourself in that position. And you believe that the only way to win the fight is to resist the craving with all of your might. If you manage to ignore it and not drink, or manage to defeat it and not drink, you feel like a champion. Right, woohoo! But if you give in, you feel defeated, like you've lost the battle. So it's no surprise that we have the big swings of highs and lows when we're operating with this mindset. But think about what's going on behind the scenes. The fighter mindset is really based on the idea that cravings are something we need to conquer. Now, the problem with this approach is that cravings aren't actually an enemy. They are just a signal. Right? A signal, it's a cue. A craving is a thought. It's an urge that arises for a reason, even if you don't know what it is at that time. And it's not something we need to beat down or therefore win against. Right? But when we adopt the fighter mindset, we're not really looking at the root of the craving. We're just focused on winning in the moment. We're focused on the action we take in the moment. And by the way, we're also then focused on what that makes us mean about us, right? So if we win, if we're jubilant, if we defeat the craving, that means we're a winner. And if we don't, we're a loser, right? And then we go into that negative spiral. So I just want you to think about that's what's going on when we have this fighter mindset. Okay, so now let's talk about some pros and cons of this mindset, because you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, Anna, that's what I do, but actually it's not always that bad. Now, there are definitely some good things that can come with a fighter mindset. First of all, it can feel empowering when it works. It can for sure feel empowering, right? And when cravings hit and you're telling yourself, I'm strong enough to resist, that can give you a sense of, feeling of control, at least in that tiny piece of moment. And these are positive messages, positive reinforcing messages we're giving ourselves about our capability, right? So that can be a positive thing. And in doing this, you might actually feel that you're taking charge of your choices and proving to yourself that you're in control. If you're a fighter, you might also get a sense of victory. As I said before, when you push through the cravings, you're going to feel proud of yourself for resisting. And that pride can give you motivation to continue on your path of mindful drinking, right? So that can fuel other actions that you take. And that is great, right? That's very positive. We want to feel empowered. And while willpower is definitely not a long-term solution, it can get you some places in the short term. So if you really need to rely on it for a short amounts of time, that's not a problem. But here's where the fighter mindset can start to work against you. One big problem is that it can be exhausting. And I've actually, by the way, just felt exhausted just as I've been talking this through. I have had a real feeling of exhaustion in my body when we talk about this sort of fighting language. It brings it all on for me. Fighting cravings all the time requires a lot of mental and emotional energy. When every craving feels like a battle, that's going to get tiring. So you think how many you might have in one evening. When you're constantly resisting something, that can actually then also make that craving stronger, not weaker, right? It's like you're trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Think about that. The more you push, the harder it gets to hold that beach ball underwater, right? The resistance, it just builds and builds. And if you are constantly fighting, the temptation to just give in and end that discomfort can feel and become even stronger. The cycle of resistance and temptation can actually make cravings feel like they're always there, right? Like you're always going to be in a tug of war with your desires. Eventually, it can leave you feeling drained. And then when you finally do give in, because let's face it, we can only put up with that level of resistance and exhaustion for so long, the guilt can be overwhelming. Another side is that fighting cravings often means that you're not really addressing the root cause of why the craving exists in the first place. I talk about this a lot. Drinking is an action that we take. It's an action in response to something that is unfolding in our brain, right? And when we're focused only on the action, when we're focused only on resisting, you might miss the opportunity to understand why you are craving something in the first place. Are you stressed right now? Is this a habit, or is there some kind of social pressure going on? Are you using alcohol as a way to cope with a particular person or situation or circumstance in your life? When we only fight on fighting the craving, which is the effect, right? We overlook these important questions, which is the cause. Very different, very important. So how do you know if you're stuck in the fighter mindset? Well, I think there are going to be many of you who are going to probably know this with what I have just said already. But here are a few signs to look for if you want to dive into this a little deeper. I want you to think back to the last time you had a craving. Right? Just think back to that, whenever that was. And how did you handle it? Did you feel like you had to defeat it? Or maybe did you experience an internal struggle that made you feel as though you were at war with yourself? If you're nodding your head, that's a strong sign you're in fighter mode. When cravings arise, do you tend to say things like, I'm stronger than this? Or I can resist? If resisting cravings feels like a competition where the goal is to win by saying no, then the mindset of a fighter is most likely your default approach. And another way to check is when cravings do hit, do you feel an immediate sense of pressure to just do something about it right there and then? The fighter mindset often involves a sense of urgency, like I have to make this craving go away and go away right now. And by the way, before you were aware of doing something about cravings, our default response would have been to drink, right? When we drink, we get rid of the craving right there in that moment. So the fighter response is similar to that. If you feel like you need to fight your way through it, then you are a fighter. Now, if you've spent a lot of time in this kind of fighter mode, I am not saying you have to throw away all of that all together, right? You don't have to throw away all willpower altogether. We can wean you off it. But what if you could balance the fighter mindset with a more relaxed, yes, relaxed, and mindful and thoughtful approach? Here's how you can start making that shift. So instead of seeing cravings as a battle, what we need to do is try to observe them. We need to shift our thinking from I need to fight this to I wonder why this craving is here right now. When you approach a craving with curiosity, it's going to take some of the pressure off. You're not focused on resisting it. You are simply observing it. You're asking what is going on in your mind and body in that moment. Are you tired? Are you bored? Are you stressed? Understanding what is triggering the craving is key. Another tip is to introduce some self-compassion. And I know a lot of you have trouble with this. We're much more on the want to beat myself up camp. But really, self-compassion is the secret fairy dust here. If you give in to a craving, it does not mean, let's rewrite the story, it does not mean you have lost the battle. You are human. Cravings are a natural part of life. We have cravings for all sorts of things. You go for a long, hot walk across, the sand. By the end of it, you're going to want a drink of water, right? Your body's going to be craving this. If you haven't eaten for a while, you might find that you're craving some sustenance, right? This happens in all parts of our life. We don't want to judge ourselves. We want to treat ourselves with kindness. I want you to think about it this way. If a friend came to you feeling defeated after giving in to a craving, how would you react? You wouldn't say, oh, you're such a loser. Why did you do that? No, you'd offer support and understanding. You wouldn't guilt trip them. So I want you to offer that compassion to yourself. It might help, by the way, to do this in front of the mirror. You get to see your reflection and you get to talk to yourself in a way full of compassion. Yes, talking to yourself is just fine in my book. Another thing that can really, really help is to practice what I call mindful awareness. This is very simple. It is when you feel a craving, rather than immediately going into fight mode, just try breathing. Just breathe deeply and give yourself a moment to reflect. Ask yourself what's really going on here. What do I need right now? Our goal is to reduce the pressure we're feeling in the moment, because when that happens, we feel less overwhelmed by the cravings. Let's look at a real life example of the fighter mindset. Imagine you've had a long, stressful day. Maybe your boss was tough on you. Maybe your kids have been demanding. And now you're home craving a drink to unwind. In fighter mode, you might say to yourself, nope, I'm not going to give in. I've been doing so well. I can do this. And I just want you to feel when you say that, how that feels. You're going to resist, you've decided. But what happens is the craving doesn't go away. It just gets louder. Now, instead of fighting, what if you stopped and asked yourself, what's behind this? Why do I feel the need to drink right now? And you might realize it's really about stress, or perhaps you need a break. This is not necessarily about the alcohol. Instead of fighting craving, what else could you do to give yourself what you need? Another way of looking at this is if you imagine you're in a tug of war, right? You know how that is when everybody braces and you've got to try and pull the other team over the line. If you imagine you're in a tug of war, you've been in a tug of war with your cravings, what will happen if you just dropped the rope? I'm just not going to have this, but I'm going to drop the rope, right? The craving would just collapse. The other team, they kind of just fall backwards, right? The tension is released. How could you do that for yourself? And what would that mean? And I want you to think about how you would reframe this. This is not giving in. This is just meeting your need in a different way, right? This is approaching the situation in another way. So if you're a fighter, here are a few practical tips to help you manage cravings without feeling like you're constantly in a battle. Firstly, you can pause and reflect. Take a moment to check in with yourself and find out what's really going on with you in that moment, or what's been going on with you that day. You can practice mindfulness, and I know that sounds all jargony, but really what we're talking about here is just giving yourself a little space, a few deep breaths, and just observe what's happening instead of you're immediately reacting. Just come into the present. Thirdly, practice some self-compassion. This is kindness. Really, people, this is like the number one thing. If you want to help your journey with alcohol and changing that, start being compassionate with yourself. It is okay to slip up now and then. It's important as we learn and we move forward. We do not have to win every single battle. As a fighter, you may also find it helpful to have a backup plan, right? If you know this is your default, how are you going to respond instead? Whether you're going to have a non-alcoholic drink first, or do some kind of pre-planned soothing activity, or maybe just take a moment of quiet. It can be really helpful to have these things decided in advance. All right, that's a wrap for today's episode on the fighter mindset. Remember, cravings are not a battle, it is a signal. If you shift from fighter to a more balanced view of things, this can help you to understand and manage your cravings. Next week, we are going to continue with this theme, and we're going to move and talk about the baffled mindset. It's one of my favorites. All right, that's it for this week. If you know of somebody who might also be struggling with cravings, why not share this episode with them? If you want to change your relationship with alcohol to something that works for you, I can help. Go to 90dayslater.co and book your free initial call with me. This will be the best gift you could give yourself. All right, I'll see you next week. If you like what you're learning in the podcast and you want to take the work further and achieve total freedom around alcohol, let's talk. I help my clients stop reaching for that first glass of wine the moment 6 p.m. rolls around, and they don't miss out on life. Email me for more information on anna@90dayslater.co. And if you did enjoy the show, I'd really appreciate if you'd leave a rating and review to help others find the 90 Days Later podcast.